Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it. A beautiful nurse with an unfashionable name, Jeannie, and a mediocre last name, Stone, was returning home on the bus from work in a bad mood. Today she received another reprimand from her boss. The head of the therapeutic department, Benjamin. Big deal. A scolding. Say many people and would be right. But the fact is that the girl did not deserve it. She, like Cinderella in the movie, today is worthy of praise 330. 3 times, but no one ever remembered it. Yes, life was sometimes unfair. And Ginny's fate left much to be desired. She did not have what is now shown in abundance on television. A beautiful, rich life and a high-paying job. She lived on her small salary, along with her mother, in a dead-end Khrushchev 1 bedroom apartment with a 3.5-meter kitchen. Some would say that it simply cannot be, but such a kitchen existed. And not in nightmares, but in reality. Years ago, Ginny's dad made a folding table in the kitchen, like in a wagon. A regular table just couldn't be put up. He also hollowed out a niche in the wall, where they put perishables in the winter to save on the refrigerator. Dad did his best, but, as they say, he was unable to resist the system. He was fired. I had to get a shift job, and it did not do any good. Ginny didn't want to think of anything sad at all. Thoughts of her mother didn't bring her much joy either. Sylvia was an ordinary mother, not the owner of the company, and she was not a star from the sky, a teacher of Russian and literature in high school. She was smart, read a lot of books, spoke and wrote Russian perfectly. She had accustomed Ginny to that. In their house it was always spoken correctly, no slang, and a beauty too, but a formal one. She overworked herself with naughty children and became ill. Today's children were very different from their Soviet counterparts. Before, teachers were respected at school and considered an unquestionable authority. And now you are no authority if your shoes are several times cheaper than the first beauty of the class. But it was still bearable. Numerous conflicts and the impudence of the children were annoying. And according to the internet, a teacher could easily get beaten up if some kid didn't like his demands. Sylvia did not believe the internet and thought it was a universal garbage dump until the teacher was knocked out. No, it was luckily not her mother, but a colleague of hers, an elderly and intelligent teacher, Evan the physics teacher, had been punched in front of her eyes, and he just stood there with his hands down. After all, he could have been sued for giving up the local rich man's insolent son. His mother rushed to defend him, but she was also hurt. As a result, she flew aside and fell down. It all got hushed up. It could not have been otherwise. Money ruled everything. This incident was no exception. Yes, it was the principal who got paid, and not just anyone. Sylvia was hardly hurt, not even a bruise. But after that incident, she was in a constant state of stress. All her ideas of justice were shattered. In addition, her mother became afraid to go to class. Ginny's nurse realized that this was the reason, and she had even detailed it. The constant stress had disrupted the transmission of signals in the synapses of the brain from the axons to the dendrites. Yes, Ginny was a very clever girl. Neither persuasion nor exhortation helped. Ginny even invited a psychiatrist home to help. The psychiatrist brazenly took a quarter of Jeannie's salary for the visit, but didn't help. He said he could just dull the focal point in her brain and prescribe sedatives, but that would do no good. Mom would be addicted or turn into a vegetable, and it would not be possible to eliminate the focus completely. That is, it will be possible to eliminate the direction of the flare-up. Mom will stop being afraid to go to work and will start being afraid of something else. For example, to bathe or cook. The girl was not satisfied with this. All perspectives were rotten. She honestly tried to digest the Aesculapian explanation. How could this be? And the new directions in the treatment of stress and phobias. Psychiatry does not stand still. But the psychiatrist advised me not to read nonsense from the internet, and taking the money departed in an unknown direction, leaving behind a sense of frustration and a trail of expensive perfume. Constant stress was a trigger and caused type 2 diabetes. And suddenly my mother gave up. She lost weight, became gray, thought constantly some kind of unhappy thoughts, and stopped caring about Jeannie. And her sugar started to spike. And everyone knows what that can lead to. Soon, because of frequent absences, her favorite school offered to get out. Nobody wanted a constantly sick teacher, and not very adequate. So she proudly walked out. Sylvia did not tolerate such things, and Evan stayed. Even that felt like a blatant injustice. But it was simple. He wasn't as proud as his mother. Besides, there were 7 of us. There was no work, like the adverts. No and not known. It's only on TV and in commercials that everyone finds a decent job. But in reality, 50 plus. Something ants weren't even hired to clean porches. All the jobs were taken by resourceful women from the former Soviet Union republics. It's too late to be a courier. So is a pizza delivery girl. And the bag cannot lift. And to sit on the cash register ashamed. By the way, the same resourceful female residents of nearby foreign countries also sat at the cashier's desk in stores nearby. As an option, I could have given face-to-face and online lessons. But my mother apparently decided to quit her glorious pedagogical past. She certainly couldn't get hit on the computer, though. Ginny huffed and puffed and gave up, giving her mother the freedom to choose, even though it wasn't much of a choice. And Mama sat down at home, or more correctly, lay down. Of course, there was always some food, and it was cleaned up too. But there was an eerie stamp of ennui and hopelessness on everything, as they say now, and she didn't want to go home. Now, Ginny took the longer bus ride even though she was off duty for the night, so she lived on one nurse's salary. There was enough for food and some clothes from the thrift store, but that was as far as it went. Besides, even there, prices had skyrocketed. The desired capitalism was at everyone's throat. Mama Sylvia had to be treated. Medicine had been optimized and free treatment had become quite problematic. In addition, a diet was required. The diet had to be nutritious and of good quality, with lots of vegetables and reduced carbohydrates. And it was simply unacceptable to feed a person just cheap cabbage. And if before it had been possible to get away with pasta, now it just didn't work. Jeannie pushed herself and began to take extra work, running in the evenings with injections in nearby homes. But she soon realized that this way of life would gradually lead to the same kind of stress as her mother's. In short, things were worse than ever. In addition, the head of the department at the hospital where the girl worked had his eye on her, which was common both before and now. And it's the talk of the town. If you want to get ahead in your career, you have to give in. Ginny was not only smart, she had a mental reserve, as they say nowadays. And she knew exactly what happened to the unruly. And that was exactly what Ginny was. Like the actress beauty Audrey Hepburn, who refused the director, with all the consequences that entailed. Yes, Audrey was too proud. And also the director was much older and very nasty. To do with him what he wanted, you could only do under anesthesia. And it was general anesthesia. As a result, the director shut off oxygen to the actress, everywhere and for a long time. And the fate of Jeannie, apparently, will not be like other smart actresses who did not refuse directors in time. Also, the beautiful Ginny was considered not quite modern. There were several reasons for this. First, she had a braid, not too long, but quality, as her mother had said, blonde and thick. It was exactly the kind of braid a pretty girl should have. Secondly, Ginny spoke very literate American, which in today's world of illiteracy. And, in addition, she used quotations from her favorite works in her vocabulary. But this was often unsuccessful. She simply was not understood. People preferred other readings. All in all, the girl stood out from the common herd, causing not only admiration of others, but natural envy. No one cancelled it, too. And it wasn't bad at all to have such a nice chick as a mistress, as the men who knew Ginny well said. By the way, everyone in the hospital had nicknames, and everyone knew them, but no one resisted or got annoyed. It reeked of a joyous and carefree time, to which everyone longed to return. Everyone called Ginny Kozel, alluding to the possibility of dressing in French boutiques. You couldn't tell everyone about second-hand shopping. Yes, Jenny knew how to keep her mouth shut. In short, Sterlitz number 2. In fairness, it should be noted that Benjamin, nicknamed Vennick, did not have such a repulsive appearance as the famous director, and was even considered by many ladies attractive and imposing man. But he was married, and Ginny never took someone else's. After all, Broom belonged to another woman. Besides, there were 2 boys growing up. Thou shalt not steal or commit adultery. That was what her mother had taught her, and that was what her mother had taught her, and that was what God's commandments said. Wennick did not know such suffering. He was a pronounced sybarite, lived for his own pleasure, and saw no obstacles in a small but so pleasurable adultery. The girl did not go for all this. Intimacy only after marriage, and not with Vennick. But such plans ran counter to the manager's intentions. He was not going to get a divorce. No, he did not lie that his wife is hopelessly ill or suddenly blind, like the hero Pierre Richard in his favorite Ginio movie, The Umbrella Shot. He said honestly that he would not leave his wife. She was his reserve parachute. It's just that Vennick had a rich mother-in-law who loved him, and that's a rarity nowadays. Yes, of course, it's not quite the same compared to Kissa and the diamonds hidden under the upholstery of the chair, but still. And there's no point in sawing off the bough you're sitting on. And not just sit, but very well and comfortably. At least the chief was being honest here. In short, Ginny should have been more sympathetic and regularly made love to Broom on the cold couch in the treatment room. But Ginny didn't want that. She didn't want anything at all. All her feelings were still asleep in her, and the intrusive embrace of the insolent Wennick caused her nothing but irritation. Yes, Ginny looked very attractive and appetizing, but she was a far cry from our famous TV models. They would have made a real splash here. The girl took all sorts of tricks, tried to wear skirts to work floor, wide pants not wearing makeup, and even in hot weather went in blouses without necklines. But nothing helped. Wennick looked at her with an oily look, and he was drooling at the corners of his lips. The whole thing made Ginny feel nauseous. And if she lay down on the couch with it all, he's a detail presenter, the bastard, thought Ginny wistfully, and tried not to be alone with the boring chief. Hardened in the art of seduction, Vennick did not expect such a fierce rebuff, especially from the usual worthless nurse, and sincerely puzzled. Why not? First of all, he is not bad-looking. And secondly, an intimate relationship with the head of promised any girl a lot of preferences. The constant protection of the attacks of bitter girlfriends and the position of head nurse, which sought to get many. And here it was Ginny who was supposed to be the lucky one. Time passed, and the stubborn superintendent began to show discontent. He began to be simply sick of it all. Big deal. So to begin with, the Satsa received a verbal reprimand, which of course she did not deserve. So, nothing special, the usual stuff. Ginny was stunned at first, then wanted to say what she thought of Wennick. Thankfully, she was smart enough not to start screaming right away, though the words were already on her tongue. So the girl took a deep breath, imagined Vennick in a coffin, as her mother had taught her, and said, "I understand everything, and it will not happen again." The only thing left to do was to ask, "May I go, sir?" and, with a curtsy, retire. She did not share what had happened with her brothers in mind. They were just waiting to take the place of a stubborn nurse in the heart of the amorous manager, and for them the position of head nurse began to loom much more promising. Ginny somehow made it through her shift, though her hands began to shake. That's all she needed, she thought, when she didn't manage to get a vein the first time. Then Venik ordered her to be put on holiday duty. This dealt a more tangible blow. After all, her mother had agreed to go on a field trip with her. This was for once. And then the little world Ginny had built began to crumble. Yes, something had to be done about the head of the house. But what? She didn't want to leave. There was already a steady time, honored credibility, and a great reputation, which the indefatigable Wreath was stubbornly trying to undermine. And, characteristically, he was beginning to succeed. The fact that Ginny had nowhere else to go added to the excitement. That's what the lustful headmaster thought. He'll come crawling back to me and lick my shoes. Today, he got attached to me for no reason at all. But our heroine did not want to lick her boots and wanted to enroll to study the doctor. My mother believed that the teacher and the doctor, the main specialties in life, and always give the opportunity to earn a piece of bread and noble, and this was valued in the family above all. But here, Venik hinted transparently that, say, to study and work at the same time will be very difficult. And he, as the head of the unit entrusted to him, he said so, does not want the quality of work to suffer. Although he used to promise golden mountains, it was clear that the dream come true in the foreseeable future was not expected. The outlook was simply disgusting. The outlook was simply disgusting. In short, choose one or the other. Bastard, Ginny thought wearily and leaned her forehead against the cold glass. The bus was warm, rolling smoothly across the asphalt surface of the road. Altogether, it gave her a calm, peaceful feeling, and she wanted to think about good things. And Ginny began to think about how she would meet a nice young man. Then she would fall in love, marry him, and have lots of kids. And they would live together in joy and sorrow, all on the same day. But then the thought immediately jumped to harsh reality. There was nowhere to get acquainted. And the transport girl fundamentally did not get acquainted. At work, the only men were the hated Venik and unworthy of Ginny nurse Alex. This cheeky young man spent all his free time playing a popular today and absolutely unknown to Ginny game of Tanchiki, which she shared every day with others. Neither of these things suited the girl. In addition, Ginny could not count on a lucrative match. She was from a poor family, and no mother would want her beloved son to bring a daughter-in-law like that into the house, even though she wasn't from out of town, and count on a stuffed prince and the same daddy king from the beloved movie Cinderella, stripped down to a citation. There was no way. After all, only he, the old-style naive, said, "If you are a poor, ignorant girl, I'll just be happy about it." Princes? Hello. Where are you? All that remained was to wait for a great and pure love. But here, too, you could sit in the waiting room all your life. So in the words of one of Dreiser's heroines, often said the well-read mother Sylvia, teacher of Russian and literature, there was no place to look for suitors and no time. Prices were rising at an unimaginable rate. It was necessary to make good money, and it took all the time. We must do something, she kept repeating in her head, to the tune of a popular song. Her mother always said that there was a way out of any situation, but it was not immediately visible. And the search can take a lot of time and effort. What a clever and well-read Mother Ginny had, after all. The sayings from the books were suitable for almost all situations in life. That's what the classics mean. But Ginny hadn't seen a way out yet. "I'll think about it tomorrow," she mentally said today's popular phrase and dozed off. And just as sleep was beginning to turn her on, her problems receded, and all the sweetness of rest for her weary body and soul loomed ahead. A cry for help was suddenly heard on the bus. Ginny, who had learned to respond even to patients' whispers, had honed everything to automatism. 6 months in the NICU was no hoochie, and now she jumped up and rushed to help. It was the only way she could do it. An elderly homeless man needed help. Homeless people also need to move somehow. He did, and he moved, and quite successfully, until he lost consciousness. Now the old man was sitting on the seat, tumbling to one side. Wisps of unkempt gray hair, a tattered wool cap, and a hat that had been worn out, knocked over to the side. In short, a classic of the genre. The common bum or bumsus vulgaris, a solid 5 in Latin. The girl's mind raced through every possible cause for her fainting spell. There were plenty of them. To make sure that the patient was more likely alive than dead, Ginny felt for a pulse not on the carotid artery, as they showed in the movies, but the old-fashioned way, on the wrist. There was a pulse. By the way, with this Americanism, the girl disagreed completely. It was much more difficult and uncomfortable to feel the pulse on the neck, but no doubt much more beautiful. Yes, the faint, thready pulse was palpable. The heart kept beating. The well-read Ginny, thanks to her mother, had quotes for all occasions. And the most favorite was the expression of the right of Victoria. The main thing was to be alive. The rest could be varied. And Ginny began to vary. For starters, she commanded a homeless man to be placed on the floor in the passageway. In emergencies, she had a commanding sense of humor. Besides, she never lost her temper. What a wonderful first. Doctor she would make. Some people are known not to know what to do with the slightest disturbance in the algorithm of their usual activities. Hence the panic attacks and stupor at the slightest opportunity. Ginny, on the other hand, belonged to a completely different group of people. They are the ones who work in the emergency services and ambulance. They help save and properly resuscitate. They knocked on the driver, and he stopped. It was more convenient to perform PAPR, an indirect heart massage, and that was what Ginny had to do. She had no ammonia, no other drugs, and no syringe with her, although now it seemed to be forbidden to provide such assistance. You had to wait for an ambulance, and sometimes it takes up to an hour. And all damn optimization. To be honest, this happened to a girl for the first time. Doing intravenous injections in your favorite hospital is one thing, but trying to revive a man on the bus under curious glances, quite another. God bless, Ginny said in a surprised voice, threw her uncle's head back and, overcoming her disgust, prepared for mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The hobo, knocked out of reality, seemed to sense that he was about to be revived. His mouth dropped open and his teeth showed, white teeth of high-quality metal. Ceramic were completely out of sync with his dirty clothes and shabby boots. There was no time to think about it, and Ginny began to work furiously. For 3 chest pokes, she was supposed to take 1 breath. It was called an emergency, which the medical school had devoted several classes to. The girl's neck and forehead were sweating, and a large drop of sweat, concentrated, fell from Ginny's forehead onto the bum's forehead. It was as if he'd been waiting for it. He turned pink, opened his eyes, coughed, and tried to get up. Ginny gasped in surprise, and the bus passengers applauded. Here it is, the glory, the girl said in her head. The revived passenger quickly regained consciousness and sat back down. He declined an offer to call an ambulance, and the bus drove off along its original route. Life went on the beaten track, and here was the stop. Grandpa had arrived at the right address. The good Ginny couldn't let the man get sick again, so she volunteered to see him off. He could sleep it off later. Somehow, the homeless man immediately agreed. In addition, Ginny noticed that he was looking at her thin silver bracelet, a gift from her mother, with amazement. She wondered if he was going to rob her, but pushed it aside. It didn't look like it, and the price of this jewelry, a small, in fact silver, unlike gold, in buying up the price of scrap. And this was worth a penny. Yes, there was something in the tramp's eyes, but it was astonishment and consternation, and not a desire to seize the satsukoi that he liked. Should say that the man really dazed, because on the arm of an unknown girl on the bus, he saw his dead wife's bracelet. That's why he agreed when she offered to see him off. He wanted to find out what, after all, happened. After all, the bracelet was the family jewel, a unique jewelry, and existed in a single number. It was made for his beloved daughter's late father, jeweler. All the more, his wife was buried with it 5 years ago. The two of them got off the bus, and the homeless man suddenly gave the girl a hand and helped her down. Yes, events began to unfold rather interestingly. Ginny's train of destiny had turned the other way and was already beginning to pick up speed. There was a striking change in the old man. His shoulders turned, his back straightened, his height increased, and he was suddenly younger. Ginny believed in miraculous transformations, but not to this extent, and fate continued to surprise. The sweaty grandfather suddenly took off his gray hair along with his cap, which turned out to be a wig. And now Ginny was looking at the pleasant face of a made-up man in the prime of his life, as the wonderful character Carlson, who lives on the roof, said. Now there are a lot of makeup men. These are the faces of men of the appropriate orientation, and artists in a hurry to use the breaks in the work and not remove the makeup. Searchers and spies, anyone but not bums. Ginny had already opened her mouth to ask the natural question. Who are you, exactly? But before she could, her former grandfather spoke up. Yes, he was not a grandfather and certainly not a bum, but the owner of a large transport company, Max. How? The savvy Ginny thought to herself. That was what she immediately dubbed him, and the boss's unusual appearance was due to the fact that he had to constantly monitor his subordinates, whether they did not violate the route and steal the proceeds. So today he decided to take the bus for a ride, and since his face was well known to all company employees, he decided to disguise himself, especially since there were plenty of opportunities for that now. He just hadn't calculated that he would be so hot in a wig and a woolen jacket. He was not a young man. It was good that such a nice girl was there in time. All this the resurrected homeless man laid out to Jeannie, and now he will call his guard and driver, and Jeannie will call and pay for a cab. But before he does, he wants to know where the girl got the bracelet. There was nothing secret about it. As has already been said, the bracelet had been given to her daughter by Sylvia's mother. It was inexpensive and of value only to its owners. It was considered a family heirloom. That's what Ginny had told the newly rich man. Mother? The bum interjected. And where is she? At home, Ginny continued. She is sick. She has diabetes. At these words, the man swallowed frantically. It was from complications of diabetes his beloved wife Anna died. It was necessary to strike while the iron was hot, and the former old man asked permission to visit Janny's mother. The girl had always been self-conscious about her hovel and almost never invited anyone home except her trusted friends. But now, apparently, something more substantial was being decided than showing off the 3-meter-long kitchen. Ginny agreed, and they got into the car, served by a polite chauffeur, and drove to the address. On the way they were silent. Each of them was thinking about his own things. All the more so, there were plenty of things to think about. Ginny was trying to figure out who was in the car with her, and the man, who had seen a favorite thing from his happy past, was absorbed in memories. Everything suddenly came rushing in and took him to a place where he had been happy for a long time. Yes, for a considerable period of time, fate had treated Max rather favorably. He managed to train on his own as a then prestigious factory engineer. Later, he was able to move up, go into business and get himself promoted. And then he met his future wife, the one love of his life. As a one-woman man, the departure of his beloved wife experienced hard, and the other women did not look, although many who wished. Max was an enviable widower. In addition, he had one indisputable advantage over the others. Their family had no heirs. Unfortunately, his wife had untreatable infertility, and they just did not dare to do all that stuff with the introduction of other people's material. Bad heredity was still an issue, and if everything was clear with Max, then one could only speculate about the contents of someone else's genome. This was not even up for discussion. Adoption did not work out either. They wanted their own blood child. They would not be able to love someone else's child, and what in the eyes of others was considered an advantage, for him was a terrible grief. The girl's old house stunned the businessman, not to mention the apartment. He had already forgotten what it was like, especially the tiny kitchen. But that wasn't what made the man go into a stupor. He was simply petrified at the sight of Ginny's mother. On the bed lay a replica of his beloved dead wife. The same manner of rubbing her earlobe and looking with her head slightly tilted, even a slight cartoonishness. Everything matched one and the same. His heart thudded in his throat at a rate of 120 beats a minute. His stomach felt cold. His neck was wet. The widowed bump was thrown back 10 years. That was how his beloved, still relatively healthy Anna had looked then. Ginny, seeing the man's reaction, thought gloatingly, "You're not going to be the head of mess." Although it was clear all the places in this wonderful department had been long and tightly occupied. Indeed, today was just a time of miracles, and moreover for all. But how could the woman in the murdered Khrushchevka be an exact copy of his wife? What is it? Reincarnation, cloning, optical illusion, or deception? There were tons of questions, and they all required immediate answers. There was something more real than a miracle. The namesake of the famous teacher tried to ask Mother Sylvia where, say, the bracelet appeared, and how long have you owned it? But she could not say anything specific. She remembered only that the bracelet was given to her by her mother, but she did not like to talk about it, and never told stories from her life. Moreover, no one was particularly interested in it until today. At the same time, they touched on her husband's poverty. Ginny's father had long since passed away. He too was overworked, but on another watch, and brought home in a zinc coffin, like a favorite movie. In short, everyone died, and even in his lifetime his family was not particularly posh. He too was proud and uncompromising. He and his mother were amazingly suited to each other and were a sweet couple. That's what their envious acquaintances called them. But the businessman was not amused. In front of him lay the one without whom he could not imagine life for the past 5 years. His train had also turned in another direction, and fate needed a little help. Max always carried money with him, just in case. Now the recovered man put out on the bedside table a few $5,000 bills. Enough for the first time. It should have been enough for a long time. Ginny, the thrifty Ginny, had learned to live on small sums. Her mother began figuratively curtsying and refusing, but Ginny took the money. Something told her she should do just that, especially since the man was already out of his stupor, and it was obvious that he was acting quite deliberately. Otherwise, later he would say that he was unconscious, forced, coerced, or simply taken away. Examples abound. At home, Max wasted no time and immediately called a lawyer he knew. Such a lawyer must be present in the life of a self-respecting businessman, and Max respected or understood himself. He understood himself, Ginny's literature teacher, Mom liked to say, and she knew a lot about the Russian language. Self-understanding young bum instantly gave the process of searching for the truth the necessary acceleration. A private detective was quickly hired, who for a handsome fee from the spot began to search for the truth. And characteristically, he found it dog. It all turned out to be extremely simple. The father-in-law, a jeweler, was once in love, and they even began to live together. And the lady of his heart gave birth to his beautiful twin girls, Anna and Sylvia. But life together did not go well, a common thing. Who was to blame for this? We do not know. A lot has already been taken to the grave. Perhaps times were hard, though times are never easy. That is what they say about them. Hard times have come, or the civil spouses did not agree in character. For example, he earned good money, but he forgot to close the tube with toothpaste, or socks at night like to put in the bedside table. Or her. She didn't like making soup. So what? In many countries, no one cooks the first thing at all. And if you do not have enough liquid, as they call the first course in Odessa, drink hot boiling water. Tea, coffee, this and that. Wise Oriental people have invented a proverb. If you like cherries, learn to spit out the pips. But very few people can do it. Everyone wants to retrain and re-educate so that someone else would spit out the pips. The jeweler could not be retrained, and his wife all the more so. To teach a scientist is only to spoil, and they both refused to spit bones. The family fell apart and the parents scattered in different directions, dividing the children. Besides, it was very convenient to do it. 2 absolutely identical girls, 2 daughters for each. 2 by 2 was a twofer, without a remainder, and no one made a buck. So it was decided. They only agreed never to meet again. Apparently we bore each other to the point of nausea. They parted, quite satisfied with each other. Before parting, the gold-armed jeweler father made 2 identical silver bracelets for each daughter in good memory of the happy days. All sisters, 1 earring. That is, 1 bracelet. Life went on in its own way and demanded joy. The jeweler father met another love. The new wife took his daughter as her own and raised her as her own and raised her as her own daughter. And then the grown-up Anna met her future husband, Max. And what became of the jeweler's ex-wife, you ask? About this, history is silent. But Ginny Mother Sylvia was her daughter, and it was she who got the second bracelet. Yes, she, the twin sister of the deceased wife of the businessman and his sister. In law, it turned out to be simple. The puzzle came together. All were left with their own. Max received the information of interest to him. A private detective promised a generous reward, and the mother of Sylvia for the first time in a long time felt better. In addition, unexpectedly turned out to be relatives of a rich man were able to accept some permanent material assistance without a wounded pride and sense of dignity. Although my mother at first tried to refuse, saying that they had everything. But Ginny, who had suddenly grown wiry, had flatly forbidden her to do so. And it's right, as a president likes to say, they both deserve a little bit of happiness, and were, if you believe the ads, it is worth it. But can today's commercials really lie? Indeed, the drop turned out to be very weighty. Sylvia now had good food, all the necessary medicines, and she had a regular visit from some luminary of endocrinology. She cheered up and laughed a lot. It was laughter, showing solid white teeth without the slightest flaw. That was how Anna, who had died, always laughed. And this laughter was much loved by the widowed Max. In addition, she was flattered by the attention of a fairly good Cajun. He frequented the Kozlov family. He was attracted to everything there. The unpretentious atmosphere, comfort, good food, and her mother's pies with cabbage, which Sylvia again began to bake. But she herself did not eat unhealthy carbs. For during the day he continued to manage the business with dignity, driving his hands in the right directions. And he liked helping the Kozlovs too. He felt that in addition to the kindred feelings for a pretty sister, in-law, there was something else in him. Yes, exactly that. Business was going well, and constant visits with Sylvia were a joy, but something kept bothering the businessman's soul. And finally, he realized, if the twins are all the same, appearance, mannerisms, laughter, and even diabetes, then how come that one sister was sterile, and the second was able to give birth? Here he did not play the smartass, but quietly took some hairs of mom and daughter with undamaged bulbs, which is called non-standard samples of biological materials, and made a now fashionable DNA test. He was also very clever. How else could he manage so many people? And successfully. Yes, he was not wrong. The relationship between the 2 samples was 0%. Ginny indeed turned out to be Sylvia's unrelated daughter. And one day, in the midst of the full prosperity and eating another batch of pies, Max asked Ginny Mom a painful question, or rather, Not a question, but an assumption that turned into a certainty. She blushed and choked on her unsweetened tea, not expecting such meanness from Kajan. But it added to his confidence that he was on the right track. Lenin's words flashed in his mind. "You're going the right way, comrades." But flushed Sylvia by all means tried to turn off the right road to the lost track and began to inappropriately tell some silly incident from life, coughing periodically and inappropriately. The stubborn Max pushed a little harder, and Ginny's mother cracked. Yes, she had adopted a girl because she was infertile, and she really wanted a child. Now everything was clear, and the businessman felt a deep moral satisfaction. Sylvia cried a little. They had touched a sore spot. But it was no big deal. Her blood sugar was stable normal, and the trophic ulcer on her right shin, which had been bothering her for several years, had healed. In addition, these were tears of a kind of cleansing. We decided not to say anything to Ginny. Why bother the girl? Besides, she had developed some kind of love, and now she was spending all her free evenings with her lover. And that was very convenient for everyone, especially since she no longer had to run around with shots to the neighbors. There was money to spare. Then everything went as it was supposed to go, and Max did what he had to do. He offered his hand and heart to Sylvia's mother, and she didn't refuse him. Who would have thought? A few months ago, their wedding took place. A small one, practically a get-together. There weren't many people, but there was a beautiful dress. True, it wasn't white, but the color itself, which suited my mother, who was beaming with joy. And it was, for the first time in her life, really kosher. Yes. Jenny stopped calling her husband Max behind her eyes and started calling him Chekhonte. Anton Chekhonte was the pseudonym of the young Chekhov, Mom's favorite writer, although she had everyone's favorite writer. By the way, this nickname really suited Max. At the wedding, everyone shouted bitter, and dressed-up Ginny yelled along with everyone else. She came to Mom's wedding with her fiancé, the young cardiologist John from next door. How great, you might say. Working together is such a blessing. Like a couple of Curies or like Grandpa Lenin and Krupskaya. Together, in joy and in sorrow, and then, with all the stops, as they say, although there was a little but here, Jeannie no longer worked at the old hospital. The fact is that her mother's loving husband had given her, his savior, a named daughter, several substantial gifts, one of which was a placement in a good clinic. I wonder by whom? 3 guesses. Yes, a senior nurse in the gastroenterology department. Hooray, hooray, hooray. When the hated chief once again hugged her, the girl wrote a statement of her own volition. Broom was dumbfounded. What other own wish? It is a privilege only he has. What is allowed to Jupiter is not allowed to Jupiter, is not allowed to the bull. And he didn't sign the application the first time, naively believing that the fool would come to her senses and go back to licking boots. Jeannie wrote another statement, and Winnick had no choice but to accept it. But with 2 weeks' work, the girl did not argue and spoil her mood, and in the morning just did not go to work, taking sick leave. It was given without any hindrance. There were a lot of infections around, and no one wanted to risk the health of workers. The kind colleagues called Ginny at home and told her that Winnick was freaking out. But she didn't care. She was starting a new life. Yes, fate had not cheated. And Ginny would be getting married to cardiologist John, too. And the bride would also be wearing a carden gown, but in a bubbly white one. And meanwhile, the application is filed in the registry office and around. A constant daily rush, as it happens in the house before the big holidays. And often the anticipation of the celebration, or its eve, is much better than the event itself. That's why Ginny enjoyed spinning in the whirlwind of such pleasant worries. By the way, the new daddy, in addition to the prestigious place, gave his named daughter a small but cozy apartment and a car. In short, a little gentleman's kit, or better to say, a set for a real lady. And he and she had already begun to furnish themselves. In addition, Jeannie had an opportunity to change. In short, not even 2, but 32 in one bottle. And, of course, a pleasant aftertaste. One free day, the girl suddenly woke up with a desire to go to the old place of work, especially since John had promised to drive her. He also had to go there for work. It was the first time she'd ever felt that urge. Why not? Ginny thought. The parting had been pretty good, actually. Yeah, Vanek yelled a little. So what? So what? So what? That's what Carlson had said. She decided to go after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There was no sense. Rounds, procedures, this and that. Besides, the stars had aligned so that John was on duty today and could go to work later. Ginny, dressed up in a holiday outfit, as the young people of today said, and did an intricate hairstyle on her head, taking the advice of a very advanced stylist girl on the internet. On the way out, we stopped at the store and picked up a couple of bottles of wine and some cake. My husband, to be said, it would be enough for the eyes. We were there around 2. When the beautiful Ginny walked into the residence room there, the only other person sitting there was Weenik, drinking strong tea from a huge and very dirty mug. I could tell by the smudges on the outside of the mug. No pattern was visible at all. You could just guess what was inside it. By the way, when the girl worked here, she used to wash the chief's smudged mug as part of her boss's assistance. To be precise, she didn't really wash it. She took and crumpled up a sheet of ordinary paper and just wiped the mug from inside and outside. And no cleansers or detergents. The scrubbed mug shone like a new one. Apparently, either Reith had not found a new sweetheart, or she, unlike the good Ginny, did not rush to take care of his beloved chief. Something was wrong with Vanek, but the girl didn't get it right away. Not expecting the appearance of his rejected beauty superintendent several seconds, without blinking, silently staring at Jeannie. Do you see who you've lost now? Ginny's mind flashed. Then the chief put the mug on the table and, swallowing his saliva, said with a beautiful syllable, the first time he called Ginny, "You know, I'm divorced." "Yeah." Ginny pretended to be surprised. "I realized that we were strangers." Vanek began to lie. Ginny later learned that his wife filed for divorce first, coming to her husband at work and caught him on heat. The tireless rascal was caught making out with another minion, and no one stopped 2 young children. Therefore, he was cut off from the trough and kicked out of the apartment. Everything was written down on the quick-witted mother-in-law, his former admirer. And now he had to spend the night in the treatment room. There was no room for him in his own little room. "And you are the only one I have ever loved," the indefatigable chef, who was tired of sleeping on the cold couch, continued to express himself in a high-pitched voice. "Yes, indeed. Be afraid of your desires. They can come true, and not quite like that either." Ginny was reminded of a glorified gymnast who flirtatiously said she wished she could just lie on her back and look up at the ceiling. But due to lack of time, she could not even do that. Her whole day is scheduled by the minutes. After a while she was doing a beam jump, she landed on the wrong feet and in a slightly different way. As a result, she broke her cervical spine and spent the rest of her life lying on her back and staring at the ceiling. Her wish had come true, but at a terrible price. The broom, fortunately, was not threatened by fractures, but sleep in the absence of a full bed began to take its toll. In addition, there was an abomination of desolation on his will, a slight unshavenness that did not suit him. The robe was not just gray, but earth-colored. His loving wife had previously washed all his robes. His head was adorned with baldness that had already appeared. Moreover, it was not from the dumbs, in the front, but from the ladies, on the front, but from the ladies, on the back of his head. And this, given the predilections of the chief, was quite natural. What a hawk, thought Ginny, who could see what was wrong. When did he do that? And Reeve perked up like a horse hearing the sound of a trumpet. No, she didn't come today for nothing. Oh, not for nothing. She heard that I was divorced and she came. From excitement, he could not think of anything. and he had to say something. Silence was growing tense. And then, fortunately, came into the residence room lively doctors and 2 nurses. The hospital conference was over, and everything spun on its own. Ginny realized she was very welcome. Why wouldn't she be? The girl put wine and cake on the table and announced that she was getting married soon. But she didn't invite anyone. She still remembered something unpleasant from the recent past. Everyone started to gossip, and Venik grew cold. How can it be married? And what about him and his big and pure feeling? The usual questions began. When is the wedding? And where will you live? And then Ginny said she had her own studio apartment now. By the way, we have to go to the furniture store today. She had just looked at something suitable. Oh, and the red car under the window is also hers. She and her husband to-be take turns driving it. The wine is drunk, the cake is eaten. It's time to leave. It's scary to look at Weenik. Ginny isn't looking. She's not here anymore. She's there. She and John have arranged to have lunch together in the morning. He can make time for her. And there he is, standing beside Reno, looking at her. My God, why should she be so lucky? As the car pulls away, Ginny has a tinkle in her bag and gets a text message on her phone. Her mother and stepfather have wired her some money, which will obviously not be unnecessary in their pre-wedding worries. What a lucky thing it was that Sekhshanta was so lucky to faint, thinks a happy Ginny. And rightly so,